Allow me to begin this lesson by asking you a question. Have you ever visited any medieval Indian city like Hampi or Surat? If you haven't, then you must keep these cities on your bucket list. Now you must be wondering why I am suddenly asking you to visit these medieval Indian cities. This is because these cities are very rich in history, along with having many architectural marvels and splendid temples. Because of this, you should definitely visit these cities. Now, studying history as an academic discipline bridges the gap between the past and the present. While we study history, we get to explore the things of the past. We get to explore the unknown. And only by studying history, we get to know our roots. So, in this lesson, we will now try to understand towns, traders and craftspersons as they were prevalent or as they could be found in medieval India. So now it is time for us to consider ourselves travelers with a time machine and go back to medieval India. Let us begin this lesson. For the purpose of our discussion, we have to keep this very important point in mind. Medieval Indian towns were divided into three categories, and these three categories were administrative towns, temple towns and port towns. In this lesson, we will be focusing in particular on administrative towns and temple towns. So, let us begin this discussion on administrative and temple towns in medieval India. Now, administrative towns you should keep in mind were the seat of administration. Now, what does this mean? To put it simply, administrative towns were capital cities. Now, these capital cities were relatively bigger in size than the rest of the towns and villages in any territory or in any kingdom or in any empire. And because these places were more populated, because these places were more important, and because these places had better access to trade and other resources, these cities were declared the capital cities. So, these were the centers of power under various rulers and kings. Now, one such instance of a capital city was Fatehpur Sikri. Fatehpur Sikri was founded by the Mughal Emperor Akbar, and after Akbar founded Fatehpur Sikri, he declared it as his capital city. So now you can understand that administrative cities were essentially capital cities. These were the places where the emperor or the sultan or the king sat and governed their own kingdom and empire. These places were strategically and geographically very important to the rulers. Now we have talked about Fatehpur Sikri that was founded by the Mughal Emperor Akbar. Now let us find out about another administrative town in medieval India, and it will be imperative on our part to find out how important this administrative town was. So are you not interested to know which administrative town I am talking about? The administrative town I am referring to in this regard is Thanjavur or present-day Tanjore. Now, Tanjore or Thanjavur was the capital of the Cholas. You must be remembering that the Chola dynasty ruled in the Tamil region, and the city of Thanjavur was their capital. So, Thanjavur was the administrative center or the center of power of the Cholas or the Chola dynasty. Now, Thanjavur has been a very important place with regard to its geographical location. This is because it is located on the banks of the Kaveri river. This is the Kaveri river. This entire Kaveri valley is a very fertile tract of land, and Thanjavur as the capital of the Chola dynasty has been very important strategically. Now, let us find out more about Thanjavur and its importance. Now, whenever we take the name of Thanjavur, another very important temple that comes to our mind is the famous Raja Rajeshwara temple. The Raja Rajeshwara temple, that is also known as Brihadeshwara temple, is located in Thanjavur or the present-day Tanjore. Now you must be questioning who built this Raja Rajeshwara temple. It was the Chola ruler Raja Chola, who commissioned the construction of Raja Rajeshwara temple, and this temple was built in the 10th century. In this image you can see the Raja Rajeshwara temple. It is an architectural marvel in its own right. It's huge and it's massive. It's beautiful at the same time, and it was King Raja Chola who commissioned the construction of the Raja Rajeshwara temple in the 10th century. So the 2 points that we have to keep in mind in this regard are that Thanjavur was the capital city or the administrative center of the Cholas, which is why it has been very important to them. And simultaneously, Thanjavur is also the place where was located the famous Raja Rajeshwara temple. Now let us find out few other very important details about this Raja Rajeshwara temple. Now let me ask you a question before proceeding with this lesson. The Raja Rajeshwara temple was built during the reign of which ruler? Will you be able to help me with an answer to this question? Was it built during the rule of King Raja Chola, or Emperor Akbar, or King Rajendra Chola, or King Krishnadeva Raya? Yes, you are right. The Raja Rajeshwara temple was built during the reign of King Raja Chola of the Chola dynasty, and this temple was built in the 10th century. Now let us proceed with our discussion and find out that detail about the Raja Rajeshwara temple. A person by the name of Kunjaramallan Raja Perunthacchan was the chief architect of the Raja Rajeshwara temple. So the points that we have to keep in mind are that the Raja Rajeshwara temple was built during the rule of King Raja Chola, and who was the main architect of this temple? It was Kunjaramallan Raja Perunthacchan. And this architect, after building this massive and magnificent temple, even carved his name on the wall of the temple. Now, will you be able to tell me why the architects inscribed their names on the walls of the temples or the architectures they made? This is because they wanted to ensure that people knew who was the architect of that construction or who was the architect of that one piece of architecture. So, in order to keep his name preserved in the pages of history, this chief architect of the Raja Rajeshwara temple carved his name on the walls of the temple. Now, few points that we have to keep in mind while we discuss the Raja Rajeshwara temple is that it's a massive temple, and inside this temple there is a huge Shiva Linga. You should also remember that the Chola dynasty or the Chola rulers were Shaivites. That is to say, they were worshippers of Lord Shiva. And whenever they built temples, the main deity in those temples was Lord Shiva. And a similar thing can be seen in the case of the Raja Rajeshwara temple as well. It is Lord Shiva who is worshipped in this temple. And this temple is considered as one of the 108 most ancient temples of Lord Shiva existing in ancient Kerala. In fact, it is one of the most honored temples of Lord Shiva that one could find in medieval India. So this was a brief lesson on the history of the Raja Rajeshwara temple. Now let us proceed with this lesson and find out few more details about this Raja Rajeshwara temple. Temples that were built during medieval India had a very proper and coherent structure. In those temples, after the main entrance, there was a long mandapa or a mahamandapa. In these mandapas, dancers gathered to perform before the masses, to perform before the king, and to perform before the main deity as well. Simultaneously with that, the temple also had these mandapas for the king to hold court. So, these are the mandapas. These mandapas had many pillared halls, and in these mandapas the king held court. That is to say, people gathered before the king had his officials and ministers, he sat at the center of everything to take care of administration in his kingdom. And this temple was also important in another regard, because this temple houses barracks for the army. Barracks are places where the armies or soldiers stay, And so this Raja Rajeshwara temple, simultaneously with having mandapas where the king held court, also had barracks for the army. Now with this, we come to a very important line of discussion. The idea that we will now try to establish is that temples were central to the economy and society. Now, how were temples important to the economy of any kingdom or any empire? This is because whenever a temple was constructed, around it many people started staying. So in a way, the temples now emerged as the nuclei of the settlements, because people from different places in the kingdom or different places in the empire now started staying around the temples. Now what did this lead to? This led to the growth of settlements around the temples. So in this illustration, you can see here's a temple, and around these temples you can see a lot of buildings, which signify that many people have come to stay around the temples. And now when settlements started growing around the temples, these places now came to be known as temple towns, because these towns were surrounded, or these towns had a temple as its center or as its nucleus, because of which these towns came to be known as temple towns. In the beginning of this discussion, we raised this point that in medieval India, towns were divided into three categories, and the first category we took into consideration were the temple towns. So now you know how temple towns emerged, or how temple towns came into being. Now when temple towns started growing, a lot of priests, workers, artisans, traders and various other people started staying around the temples. Now priests are required to offer prayers or to worship the deity, because of which priests started staying around the temples. Along with that, workers were also required to maintain a temple, to maintain a town as a whole, because of which workers also started flocking to these temple towns. Artisans were required to produce various kinds of goods, to produce various pieces of arts, which were in turn required by the people. And along with them, traders were required, because without traders, the economy of any given kingdom or any territory will falter, because traders are the one who perform trade, because they sell and buy goods, and in this way they keep intact the economy of any kingdom, the economy of any territory. So together people of various professions started staying in temple towns. So because of this, the temples were now contributing to the economy of any given kingdom or territory. Along with that, you have to keep in mind that the medieval India was a place for many wealthy merchants, and it was mostly the wealthy merchants and the royalty who constructed these temples. While they constructed these temples, they also provided various land grants to the temples, because lands were further required for the maintenance and upkeep of the temple, because the resources or the food crops that were grown in the lands were important for the maintenance of the temples. So with this, the land grants also made the temples central to the economy of the kingdoms. Along with this, the temples also contributed to the economy in another way. Let's find that out. Now consider you are visiting a temple. Will you be able to do anything to maintain and preserve a temple? No, because most definitely you will not be able to do this directly. Now how will you do this, even if it's indirectly? For this, you give or you make donations to the temples, and the temple authorities use these donations for the maintenance and preservation of the temples. In a similar kind of way, when these temples were constructed in medieval India and many visitors paid their visit to these temples, a lot of money came through pilgrims in the form of donations, because the pilgrims or the visitors who came to these temples now gave huge amount of donations. Now what was done with this amount that was gathered in the form of donations? This amount in turn was channelized into trade. So previously we learned that traders settled around the temples, that is, traders settled in the temple towns. And the money that then came to the temple in the form of donations was then used or utilized in trade. So this made the temples contribute to the economic growth of the kingdoms. So now we have understood this point that we tried to raise, that temples were central to the economy and the society. Society in the sense that temple towns now grew only because a temple was constructed, and economy in the sense that the money that came to the temples was heavily required and utilized in trade. So the point we have understood by now is that temples were center of economic development. Now we have understood that temple towns were places that had a temple in its center, or a temple as a nuclei of the settlement. Now whenever people start staying somewhere, they required a huge amounts of resources. They also require many goods for their sustenance. Now where can you find goods? To find goods or to buy goods, the only place that you have are markets. And in these temple towns now emerged markets of a particular kind that came to be known as mandapika. So in these temple towns now mandapikas were built, and in these mandapikas villagers sold their products. Now zoom in on this illustration. What do you see? Roughly this shows you a marketplace, and in this marketplace many people have come to sell their own products, and many people have come to buy those products. So this is a place where selling and buying of things take place. Now whenever people are staying somewhere, they require goods, and to procure those goods, markets were built, and these markets that were built in the temple towns were known as mandapika. Now the most obvious question that must be coming to your mind in this regard is that which products were sold in these mandapikas? So let's find out the products that were sold in these markets. In these markets, grains, spices, cloth, jewelry and various other products were sold. Here you can see various kinds of grains, and here you can see different kinds of spices. Along with grains and spices, jewelry were also sold in these markets. So now you know which products were sold in these mandapikas that were built in the temple towns. By now we have understood the concept of a market. A market is a place where people sell and buy their goods. Now markets were also limited in size or limited in space. Now do you think every product, every good could be sold in those mandapikas alone? Most definitely not, because so many things were required to be sold for the people who settled in those temple towns. Now where were the other things sold that were not sold in the mandapikas? For this reason now came into being the hattas. What are hattas? Hattas were street markets. So in these temple towns, on the one hand you have proper markets which were known as mandapikas, and on the other hand you have street markets. That is, the streets were utilized to sell and buy products. In this illustration you can see how there is a street, and by the side of a street a hatta is taking place. Now this hatta is something that you can still find in today's India, and this hatta was also important in the sense that these hattas became the meeting point for buyers and sellers. So hattas and markets together were the meeting point for buyers and sellers, because if there were no hattas, no mandapikas, how would the buyers and sellers meet? In today's world, we have many shopping malls, we have many shopping arcades, we have small stores and shops where the buyer can meet a seller. But such things were not prevalent in medieval India. And for the purpose of buying and selling of things, mandapikas were built, and along with mandapikas there were also street markets which were known as hatta. The medieval period was a time when people were self-sufficient. That is to say, things were done manually, because there was no access to machines and computers like we have today. Today we produce various kinds of things with the help of different machines. But in those period, such machines were not found. Now, why am I telling you this? Because there was a weaving community by the name of Salya. So the Salya weavers were present in Thanjavur and Urayur. Now the Salya weavers weaved, or they made huge pieces of cloth manually. In this image you can see how a weaver is weaving a piece of cloth. Now this was done manually during the medieval period. Now what was this piece of cloth used for? This piece of cloth that was weaved by the Salya weavers of Thanjavur and Urayur was used for various purposes. Few of those purposes would be as cloth for flags to be used in temple festival. Even today on the top of many temples you could find flags, and these flags during the medieval period were weaved by the Salya weavers. Along with that, they also weaved fine cotton for the king. The king and nobility wore clothes that were made of fine cotton, and these pieces of cloth of fine cotton were weaved by the Salya weavers. And along with that, they also weaved coarse cotton for the masses. From this you can also find out the hierarchy that was present in the society. The Salya weavers weaved fine cotton for the king and nobility and coarse cotton for the masses, because the king was at the top, or the king was the person in power, which is why he got to use fine cotton, and coarse cotton was weaved for the masses. And all these pieces of cloth were weaved by the Salya weavers. Now zoom in on this map. Here you can see Thanjavur, that was the capital of the Cholas, and here you can see Urayur. We just mentioned the name of the place Urayur in the sense that we talked about how the Salya weavers belonged to Thanjavur and Urayur. Close to Thanjavur and Urayur was located another village by the name of Swamimalai. Now let us find out how Swamimalai is important in our discussion. Because Swamimalai is a place where many sculptors used to reside, and the sculptors were also known as Sthapatis. The Sthapatis, or the sculptors of Swamimalai, made exquisite bronze idols, and one such bronze idol you can see here on this image. Isn't it very beautiful? Can you see how intricately works are done on this bronze idol? And along with making exquisite and very beautiful bronze idols, the sculptors of Swamimalai also made tall ornamental bale metal lamps. Now these are things that you find in museums today. But in medieval India, these things were built by the sculptors of Swamimalai. By now we have understood the concept of temple towns. Temple towns were places where settlements grew around a temple. Now many people started staying, or many people started settling in these temple towns. The first and foremost requirement to remain alive is water. Now from where did these people get water? For this purpose, tanks and wells were constructed. Now these tanks and wells were mostly constructed inside the complex of temples. But along with that, tanks and wells were also constructed outside the temples, and these tanks and temples provided or supplied water to the people who lived in the temple towns. While undertaking this discussion on temple towns, the most important point that we have understood by now is that these temple towns, or these pilgrimage centers, emerged as townships. These became settlements. And now let me give you few other examples of temple towns that could be found in medieval India. First up on our list is Villaswamy, which is a temple located in Vidisha in the Indian state of Madhya Pradesh. This temple could be found in central Madhya Pradesh. and around this temple Villaswamy a settlement emerged. Along with that, we also have to take into account the temple of Somnath in the Indian state of Gujarat and the temple Tirupati in the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh. Around these two temples as well, temple towns emerged. Now let us go to the Indian state of Tamil Nadu. Here we find the Kanchipuram Kalashanathar temple. Along with that, we also find the Tiruvannamalai Arunachaleshwarar temple in Tamil Nadu. Both of these temples are located in Tamil Nadu, and around these as well, temple towns emerged. Now let us go to the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh. Another temple town that we could find there is Vrindavan. So on this screen you could see various temples in various Indian states and how these temples gave birth to new temple towns, how these temples gave birth to settlements around themselves. Now let us move a few centuries ahead. What do we find here? When we come to the 12th century, we find the shrine by the name of Ajmer Sharif. Have you visited Ajmer Sharif? It's a beautiful shrine. It's marvelous and you should definitely make sure to visit this. Now, Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti was a Sufi saint and he settled in a place called Ajmer in Rajasthan in the 12th century. And there his shrine was constructed, which came to be known as the Ajmer Sharif. Now this dargah has been important in the pages of history for a very pivotal reason. This is because this dargah, Ajmer Sharif, in spite of being a shrine of a Muslim Sufi saint, attracted devotees from all creeds. So previously all this while we have been talking about temple towns. Now these temples were Hindu temples, and here in the 12th century we come to Ajmer Sharif. And this shrine was made for the Sufi saint Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti. Now when we come to this shrine, we see that people from all religions are coming to pay their respects here. Now this is an instance of secularism in its true spirit, secularism in its truest essence. This is because this shows religious coexistence. Hindus, Christians, Muslims, Parsis, Sikhs and people from many other religions came to visit Ajmer Sharif, and this is an instance of religious coexistence. With this, we come to an end of our discussion on administrative and temple towns. We began this discussion by talking about administrative towns, which were the centers of power or which were the capital cities. Along with that, we then came to discussing the temple towns. These temple towns also emerged as very important to the economy and the society, in the sense that these temple towns were places where people started forming settlements. And when people started gathering in these temple towns, trade developed in these places. And since trade developed, these places now contributed to the economy of the kingdom or the territory. With this, we come to an end of our discussion on administrative towns and temple towns. What did we learn from this lesson? From this lesson, we got to know that during the medieval period, towns were divided into three categories. And these three categories were the administrative towns, the temple towns and the port towns. In this lesson, we have focused on the administrative towns, which were the capital cities or the centers of power, and the temple towns, which were places in which temples were the nucleus of settlement. That is to say, settlements grew around the temples. It is one such temple town in medieval India that we will be focusing on in our subsequent lesson. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers, or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. learn via games, and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.